Good afternoon, guys. Welcome back to my channel, Historical Horses. I hope you're having a very relaxing Sunday afternoon. I am now uploading on a Sunday rather than the Friday. It just gives me that little bit more room to get this filmed and edited and uploaded. So from now on, it'll be every Sunday at 4 p.m. And I feel like Sunday afternoon feels like the perfect time to have a little history video. And I'm so excited to bring you today's topic, which is about the incredible Victorian fire engine horses who were unbelievably brave. I did put in the title the bravest Victorian horses, but I actually think all Victorian horses are brave, especially those working in the cities, because they worked incredibly hard. They didn't necessarily get treated that well. So they're all the bravest. But what the fire engine horses would have witnessed, the loud noises, the crowds, the smells, the fires, does make them incredibly brave. So let's get into it. Now, the fire brigade horses were known for being the bravest, the toughest, the fastest, and the most level-headed, which you're going to need to in that job. Before the Metropolitan Fire Brigade started in 1866, there was a different type of fire service. So the first fire brigades took the form as professional and volunteer services, as well as insurance companies. So this image on the screen now from 1825 shows a building fire and the company Phoenix Fire Office charging to the scene. They were a fire insurance company. Next picture, you can see that Phoenix Fire Station on Cockspur Street in 1873. So people would pay a fee to the insurance company to insure their property against damage, to protect their customers. Properties insurance companies would then have their own fire engines and watermen. They didn't use the term fire brigade back then to put out the fire. But you can already see in those pictures, horses were being used to pull the fire engines. So we can sort of date it back to, well, in that first image it says 1825, but in records it sort of says from the 1850s, horses were pulling the fire engines. So as I said, the Metropolitan Fire Brigade started in 1866 and they used horses to pull their fire engines. And it's hard to imagine just what these horses would have witnessed when they arrived at the scene of a fire. The smells, the noises, often there were large crowds surrounding the fires, watching. You can imagine all the shouting and screaming. One of the earliest surviving purpose-built fire stations in London is the former Peckham Road fire station, as you can see in this picture, which was built in 1867. And this is the Tooley Street fire station, which was built in 1879. And horses initially were sort of stabled nearby to the stations, but soon they were starting to be stabled on site because obviously if they were there, they could get to the scenes of fires or accidents a lot quicker. And from 1867, Thomas Tilling, who ran many of the London's horse-drawn omnibuses and was probably the biggest supplier of horses in London, he would loan his horses out to the fire service. So by 1892, he actually owned 4,000 horses. I mean, that is hard to comprehend. He would loan his horses out to pull canal barges for the Lord Mayor's show and even to the royal family, but he also supplied the Metropolitan Fire Brigade, and his company actually trained the horses to pull the fire engines, to respond quickly and to cope with those situations that they would be coming up against when dealing with fires. Coachmen would look after the horses, they'd drive the horse-drawn fire engines to the scene, and they'd look after the horses while the firemen tended to the fire. Horses tended to be in the fire brigade service for around 8 years, assuming they started age 5 or 6. This was actually a really good length of time compared to those horses pulling the omnibuses or the trams. And they were well cared for. They needed to stay in good health to be able to do the work, to be able to be responding quickly to those fires and to cope with the situations they were put in. Grey horses were thought to be better at getting a clear road, so many of the fire brigade horses were grey. Now this photo is from a Seattle fire station, but I imagine it looked pretty similar in London. So in the late 1880s, on average, there were 5 pairs of horses kept at most stations, with 2 horses always harnessed and ready to go. Horses on watch would be harnessed ready for action, and because their harness was so heavy, especially the collars, there would be a rope from the collar up to the ceiling, and they would just lift it a little bit to just reduce some of the weight. There would also be a rope attached to their blanket, so as soon as that alarm went, there would be no undoing of buckles or surf singles. It'd be just a pull of the rope, the blanket would be off, everything to help get those horses out of the stalls and hitched up to the fire engine as quick as possible. Firefighters would often live at the stations with their families, and supposedly children would clean the uniforms and the fire engines. Fires happened a lot in the Victorian era, with common causes being unswept chimneys, poor vents, candles being knocked over. Also, clothing was highly flammable, and especially in winter, people would wear many layers, so it didn't take much for properties to go up in flames. Every home was most likely going to have a fire lit in one of the rooms, and if you were wealthy, you'd have several fires. Now, that just meant there were more chances of accidents happening. The last fire engine horses who served at Kensington Station left in November 1921. The British Path have a really lovely short clip on YouTube showing the horses on their last day, with of course horses being replaced by the motor car. I hope you've enjoyed this brief look back at these courageous horses who served our country in the fire brigade.